Okay, Carson, if I must admit, I am getting a little fatigued of podcasting and I think I need to take a little bit of a break, but I have a plan. Don't worry. Here's what we can do, okay?
Okay.
So all we have to do is after we record this episode, don't upload your audio into my Google Workspace. Send it to me by WeTransfer, and then I'll send you mine by WeTransfer. And then WeTransfer will train their AI models on our voices, and we'll never have to do this again.
Oh, man. Is that really what they're doing?
Well, no, to cut to the chase. No, it's not really what they're doing, but this is apparently what I would have thought they were doing when I woke up and did my Instagram story binging. Everybody was sharing about how WeTransfer was training future AI models on all of our music, I think people were thinking of in terms of like sending music files to each other.
Wild. And so it's I imagine like a change to the terms of service where they've said that they can, or they reserve the right to scan files, or what do they say?
So here's what they said. We'll get right into this then. So WeTransfer on their own blog. This is how they opened a sort of mea culpa, but also a clearing the air about this issue, which I noticed kind of in the week of July 14th. You know, people started sharing around like, stop using WeTransfer because they're going to make AI crap with your music specifically, was the claim that I saw a bunch of friends share and people post about. So WeTransfer, they say, on July 1st, 2025, we started notifying our customers about our updated terms of service, which come into effect on August 8th, 2025. So that's still in the future for existing customers. Then they get into which section of the terms they changed, and they identify the controversy that happened. They say the changes led our customers to wonder about two key parts, which we clarify below in this blog post. And what they want to clarify is, first of all, quote, we don't use machine learning or any form of AI to process content shared via WeTransfer. This is still quoting from them. The passage that caught most people's eye was initially updated to include the possibility of using AI to improve content moderation and further enhance our measures to prevent the distribution of illegal or harmful content on the WeTransfer platform. End quote. So I don't know if you saw this story a few years ago back, maybe, but there was a controversy at Apple where they were interested in the ability of Apple and iCloud to scan files for illegal and very terrible content, basically. And so this is almost similar to that, I think, right?
Yeah, where they're saying like, we're not going to be training. I mean, there's no like, they're not going to train a model on the files you send, which would be bad and a reason to boycott. They're reserving the right to like, outsource their automation. And I will say, this is actually one of the maybe most ethical uses of AI to automate jobs is content moderation on this en masse stuff. There's like, you can read these horrific, news stories and profiles and reports of people who have to work on Meta's content moderation team. And I'm sure there's any social platform would have the same people who have to watch horrific things.
The most horrible stuff. Yeah.
Most horrific, images, videos. These people end up with basically PTSD. And they're doing an essential service, right? Because you don't want to see a beheading in your Facebook feed. But, at the moment, a human needs to identify, we don't want that in the feed, right? And automated tools up until recently haven't really been good enough at identifying. So you wouldn't want, everyone hates when YouTube flags their video as something inappropriate when it's not. So now we're just, I think, getting across the line where AI might actually be good enough to start helping out with this. And like, humans should not have to do that job. That's one, please, let's start outsourcing that one.
Yeah, and the whole debate about wanting AI to do your laundry versus wanting to be able to make art, this is even further out of the Overton window than the laundry side of that equation,
100%. Yes, this is a much worse job than laundry. No matter how much you hate laundry, I'm sure you do not want to be a content moderator at Meta.
No, and nobody at WeTransfer either. And so that's what they changed. They updated their terms of service to more specifically address that they could use your content under license that they have while providing the service to you to enhance their service in this way if they were going to try and develop something like that. So when people noticed that change, they latched onto that, and they also latched onto another section where WeTransfer just states that by using WeTransfer, you hereby grant them an unlimited, this is a quote now, unlimited worldwide royalty-free sub-licensable transferable license to do a whole bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And the thing about that is that wasn't changed. That was already in WeTransfer's TOS, just like it's in the TOS of pretty much anything that you would sign up for. There wasn't anything unique about this, but because the AI of it all drew eyeballs to the TOS, they noticed this. And I think if you went and looked for this anywhere else, you would find it too. And so WeTransfer say in their own blog post, there's no change to how WeTransfer handles your content in practice. And they also say the language regarding licensing didn't actually change in substance compared to the previous terms of service. So yes, when we sign the TOSs, we grant all kinds of privileges by granting license for them to use our content. That is the nature of the beast. And it came to a head just because of how trendy it is to call out businesses for using AI.
It's very interesting to think about because, you know, this whole thing of like the license having not changed, that the license for WeTransfer has always been that way, harkens back to like an early era of social media where the controversy around artists using social media was like, hey, everything you post to Instagram, they own, right? Like they all, you know, they reserve the right to just like do what they want with it. And there was a lot of artists being like, whoa, like we shouldn't do this. And now it's just assumed that that's the case, or people kind of put it out of their minds. It's sort of maybe you know in principle that that's what they are doing, but really no one's talking about that. It hasn't stopped any musicians or artists from posting on Instagram.
Yeah, and it wouldn't stop people from using not just WeTransfer, but I'm sure if you use Google Drive, you are consenting to the same, but you know, as I think about it, no doubt more. There's no doubt that what Google can do with our content right now, and what they could even do with our emails, you know, that's the whole premise of Gmail, is a lot more than what people are worried about here with WeTransfer.
Yes, I think if you are concerned about this type of thing, which is valid, I think there are people with, like,
concerning,
privacy concerns. You have to just, again, it's similar to our conversations about streaming. Like if you're worried about Spotify, boy, do I got bad news for you about like everything else. If you're worried about privacy and how your data is being used by the companies, the platforms you're using, you're right to be worried, but man, this is just the tip of the iceberg, this particular one. This might be a whole other episode topic, but like you've heard, I'm sure, about the SoundCloud, very similar terms of service thing where, although more nefarious than WeTransfer, they are reserving the right to train models on music posted to SoundCloud.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that actually. So yeah, there's a whole other similar story over there.
It's similar. I don't know. I shouldn't say too much about it because I do not know all the details, and I don't know if they've ever backed down and said like, well, it's not really, we're training a model. But I think like their terms of service do permit them to do that. And so I saw a little brief push online for people to be like, well, okay, let's stop. In fact, the meme was like, start posting your worst music so that the AI can only learn on bad music, which unfortunately doesn't work because if you post bad music, AI can still learn pretty well from that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure this is not the end. We're going to have more stories like this. There's going to be more outrage like this. Some of it well-founded, but a lot of it overstated, not in the sense that nothing's happening, but in the sense that this is kind of already a lost cause, and that we are already signing this away when we agree to TOSs of all these platforms. And so if you start looking into it at all, you know, you're going to have to make a lot of choices on a lot of platforms. If that's where this is escalating, then that's going to be a big culture shift. But yeah, until then, people will pick off examples of it to share amongst themselves and have some outrage about it when it doesn't really mean that anything new happened.
Yes. And, you know, I think part of the ethos of what we're doing here is to encourage people to, like, you know, look at alternatives, right? WeTransfer is kind of a funny example because that's almost like a utility, you might call like a picks and shovels company that is, you know, providing a service to people who are using other platforms, right? WeTransfer is kind of the industry standard for sending music, large WAV files or whole albums worth of music between yourself and maybe your mastering engineer or your mix. Do you use WeTransfer for that type of thing at labels, or do you use a
Well,
proprietary?
I don't make heavy regular use of it, but I did use it to export the Jazz Hotline videos for the Vancouver International Jazz Festival that I
Yeah.
made at the Vancouver Public Library Central Branch. So I guess I am out of that line of work now. That is going to be done by an AI voice for the 2026 festival. There's no doubt. I'm sure that's the direction that the nonprofit wants to go in when they produce next year's instead of working with me.
Absolutely, and they've got enough of your voice now that they can just, do that. They can just train it all on episodes of Upsample and the RCP.
It's over for me.
It's over for you. You got to get ahead of them. You have to disrupt yourself, is what you got to do, and you got to get ahead of making like an agentic will.ai who can do the jazz hotline and sell it, license it to Coastal.
I got to go full Willie Herndon over here.
Wow. That's a deep cut. We'll let the real heads appreciate that one. So I think, that's actually a wonderful segue as we talk about kind of the harms and the, unsavory business models of a lot of these platforms, that as you begin to think of alternatives, the alternatives are forced to become very subversive, very like counter to kind of the models that we have, right? You can't really rely on advertising because then it means eyeballs matter. You can't rely solely on venture capital because those guys need returns, and they need big ones. They need kind of infinite growth. And so anything that's going to replace the status quo of Web 2.0, let's call it broadly, right? This thing of platforms, is going to be kind of a new thing, and it's going to be weird. And so I think kind of the meat and potatoes of this episode is going to be about Subvert.fm, or I think that they're just calling it Subvert. The website is Subvert.fm, which is a cooperatively owned Bandcamp alternative. We'll get into kind of why a Bandcamp alternative, because I think that's an interesting conversation, and why a co-op and what's a co-op and what we think about it. But these folks, I think out of the ashes of, is it Amplet or Ampled?
Ampled, right. So we're going to talk about that because I'll throw it right back to you, don't worry, but just quickly on my personal connection to this. So I'm wearing my Madeline Reed Concrete Country merch.
Nice.
Shout out to Madeline for actually being mentioned in the names in the acknowledgments of the Subvert document, which you could go and check later. That's a whole other story, but I'm wearing this because Madeline in her day job works in co-op education and facilitation. And so she's a subject matter expert. I'm not. But I do know Austin Roby, who is the founder here of Subvert, and he is a serial co-op founder because he previously founded this thing called Ampled, which Madeline and I were both artist members of. We found it in the heady COVID days where people were living off NFTs and vibes.
Yep.
We found this when there were, not much more than 100 artists on the Ampled platform, which was a Patreon alternative, is how Austin and many people described it at the time. A cooperatively owned alternative to the VC founded and growth hungry Patreon. And to be honest, if you look at Patreon's trajectory since then, I think the concept holds its weight. However, Ampled platform was not long. It lasted maybe 4 years, and then they shut it down because the low amount of action on the platform wasn't sufficient to grow it or cover the costs or provide distributions to the... I know I said I would throw it right back to you, but I got into that. That's my history with Austin and Ampled. And in context, Subvert is another venture that he has founded. Several of them he works with Yancey Strickler, and there are some other ones. There's one called Meta Label that we could maybe talk about as well on another episode. But Subvert is another Austin Roby joint.
Great. Is Yancey Strickler involved in Subvert as well?
So he's not one of the board members or one of the named people. I'm sure he's in the conversation, but Yancey and Austin definitely both collaborate on this other thing called Meta Label. that we can check out later.
Okay, I have heard of Meta Label, which is also a very interesting, kind of futuristic set of ideas. So, yeah, Subvert, even as we're talking about it, is pretty high-minded, I would say, right? Even, I think, for someone to say, like, hey, we need a Bandcamp alternative is still fairly bold, even in this era of Bandcamp having been sold and tossed around a few times. Like, Bandcamp's still here, still kicking, still selling things for artists. And maybe to give a bit of background on like why someone might think we need a Bandcamp alternative. Anyone who's not familiar, well, I hope if you're watching this, you're familiar with what Bandcamp is, but it's a beloved platform for artists to sell their music, and it's not a streaming service per se, although you can listen to music using Bandcamp. It's really a music marketplace, right? You can pay for whole albums, for songs, as well as like merch. Bandcamp takes very reasonable cuts. And for during COVID, every second Friday or just first Friday of the month, they were doing no cut at all. And so it became this kind of really kind of a folk hero among music platforms, right? As everyone was saying, hey, streaming was really tough on artists. Bandcamp was lauded as like the chosen one.
All of my label clients currently use Bandcamp as their primary e-commerce. All of them.
Yeah. So it's basically like Shopify for artists, right? Like on some level, right? Because it's it's a centralized platform. They don't do a ton of recommendation, but there's an editorial function, or there was an editorial function. It was a pretty cool all-in-one thing, and I think for a long time, we've said this as we discuss alternatives to streaming, and one of the recommendations is like find the artists you like on Bandcamp, spend some time on Bandcamp looking at music and whatever, and like support artists through there, because it's just a much better. Right, I make as an artist much more money from someone buying one song for $1 than listening to it even like 100 times.
Yeah. It's more tangible. You get a more tangible connection. There is still editorial at Bandcamp. We can get there where we talk about why people are unhappy with them. But please continue with your train of thought on where Bandcamp is at and what it means for Subvert.
So the first kind of cracks begin to show after, Bandcamp is this, again, folk hero to musicians, and everyone loves it and tells all their friends to go find their work on Bandcamp. Bandcamp gets sold to Epic Games I do not have the timeline in front of me. Do you have the year on that? 2021?
So this is one of two major transactions that we're going to talk about. And Epic Games is not their current owner, but this was in the spring of 2022.
Okay, so spring of 2022, it's announced that Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite, the very popular video game, and among others, Epic Games is a large game company, have acquired Bandcamp, which was a weird announcement, I think, for everyone. I think it never really became clear what Epic really hoped to do with Bandcamp, because not super long later, I think a year and a half later, Epic sold Bandcamp again.
I do actually think I can tell a story of what they might have been trying to do why they divested it so quickly. I think that Epic basically acquired Bandcamp as ammunition in a legal case against Apple, because they were trying to avoid what they felt were punitive app store commissions that took revenue from them to Apple, when really they want to own their marketplace. And they have had I don't know the current status of the legal case, but they had a long war with Apple. And Spotify would have also been sympathetic to Epic here. But Bandcamp was another example of, like, you can't on the iOS app, you can't make in-app purchases because they don't want to shed 30% of their revenue to app store sales. You can. I use Android, and I can on my Android phone, but you can't from your Bandcamp iOS app. And that's a common story with lots of apps. But it seems that Epic acquired Bandcamp to use it as part of its case against Apple, and then based on how that went or didn't go, then they didn't feel the need to own it anymore after that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it was, I guess, sort of the enemy of my enemy, kind of an alliance there, where it was odd bedfellows. But I know Bandcamp, Epic, was positioning itself as a champion for like the little guy, which is hilarious to say, because like Epic it's a Tencent property, which is like a huge conglomeration, and so they have this like David and Goliath story in court, Not to say Epic's right in this case. I'll say like the Apple taking 30% is just rent. Like it's just Apple's like charging rents on their platform, and it's pretty exorbitant. And like small devs, Epic, I do not care about. Fortnite, they're going to be fine. Fortnite's massively popular, but like small devs, 30% is way too much. And so there has been some changes recently as a result of that suit. I don't think it's like a total loss for Apple. I cannot remember the results of it.
Yeah. I mean, I will also add on in terms of the App Store thing. I mean, I learned about that from Stratechery, I guess, back in the day, because they were really talking a lot about changes at Apple in this kind of 2022 to 2023 period. So we could go and hunt that up later. But yeah, in terms of Epic versus Apple, I don't remember too much of the details there. There's also like a union angle to what happened between the two transactions with Bandcamp that maybe you already have queued up, but if not, that's a reminder to myself to get there as well.
Certainly. I mean, it goes right into this. So when Epic decided they didn't want Bandcamp anymore, they sold it to Songtradr. And I don't know really anything about Songtradr. Is it like a platform of sorts?
It's not a big name in the industry compared to other big names, but it does bill itself as one of the largest things of its kind, where it's sort of like a composition licensing marketplace.
Sure.
Yeah, not something that we would have occasion to use, but sort of like an entry into the sync licensing world, or like rights management for compositions.
Right. So it's like, I mean, I'll say that Songtradr makes more sense as an owner of Bandcamp than Epic Games, despite the legal case there. And kind of, I think right at the same time, if not just before, just after, there was a union at Bandcamp, or a kind of a fledgling union called Bandcamp Workers United. And most of those people were let go. I think especially some key players. And Songtradr was basically accused of union busting, and I think there's probably still ongoing legal fallout from that, which I think those are always really tough cases because it's very difficult to prove.
Yeah, and Epic has been accused of wanting to get its hands off of Bandcamp as soon as the union issue became a big entrenched one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Bandcamp sort of like, or Epic sort of washes its hands of having to, negotiate with the union, sells to Songtradr. And then I believe as a part of the sale, they were kind of, it's almost like a legal loophole that they could shed the union activity.
Or like they didn't have to negotiate anymore or something. Like the union lost their chance, they would say, to get the agreement that they needed. Yeah. And then they lost the people too. Yeah.
Right. So, not ideal. And this is all kind of background on, on Subvert and why some people, I think around the time, even as early as Epic, I think there was a lot of unease when Bandcamp went to being owned by, Tencent. It was sort of like, what's the plan here? Are they going to put our songs in Fortnite? Are they going to, is they going to use it as a platform to like sell other Epic Games stuff? Like it was kind of a very odd thing, but I think really with the union busting and the Songtradr is where I heard a little more rumbling about like, okay, this is not the chosen one platform that we all hoped it would be. And I know you and I talked about this around that time, saying that it was kind of funny that people were expecting this private company, because Bandcamp was just a private company, to not just like do whatever in the interest of its shareholders.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because I was also going to say there's no mystery about why Bandcamp would want to sell. At that point, they were in like year 13 or 14 as a private company all the way, doing the bootstrap way, taking some investment capital, I'm sure, along the way, but basically being a bootstrap private company. You can't fault the owners of that company for wanting to make an exit. Like Bandcamp is not going to IPO. I don't think that was ever on the table. They're not of that size. They're not going to grow fast enough to get to a size where that would make sense, or where the founders would ever feel like that was the appropriate exit. So
Yeah.
I mean, Bandcamp was always bound to be an acquisition target at some point. So, and we'll talk about this when we address Subvert directly, but like I don't think the issue, the beef that people had surrounding Bandcamp has ever been about the mere fact of an exit happening, or I would argue that certainly shouldn't be, but I don't think it is. I think it's about how it was done and how the worker types, including the artists who see themselves as part of a labor movement, feel that deal worked out for them.
Yes, I think that's right. I think also, even reading the Subvert, Subvert put out a zine, kind of a manifesto, really. I think they even call it a manifesto in the copy of it, about kind of the thesis of why they're doing this. And, it begins with a lot of explaining, like, hey, why would we even need an alternative to Bandcamp and a lot of this? And really, this is maybe one of my only criticisms of Subvert. I will say, I'm going to spoil, I'm a fan of the idea of Subvert. But one of my criticisms is like, this is a pretty vibes-based set of complaints against Bandcamp, right? People are upset that Bandcamp sold twice because they really hoped foolishly that like a private company would just kind of be this like magical fairy land where it's like, it's just going to always be good for artists forever. And that's not how tech platforms work. And like, it has to go somewhere. It has to, you're right. Like they needed an exit at some point. Because an IPO wouldn't have been good. That wouldn't have made people happy, because then the incentive would be for Bandcamp to start increasing their take. In fact, exiting to acquisition or being acquired is probably the least disruptive way that Bandcamp
least disruptive, yeah.
Sure. Well, there's another concept of exit to community, which wasn't really in the cards for Bandcamp, but that's sometimes tossed around as like kind of a radical way of kind of, again, subverting the traditional models of tech. But I think in retrospect, and I was one of those people, I agree, like the vibes are not great when like a platform that you like using and for some people provides a chunk of your living gets tossed around these larger entities that you are not a huge fan of, and certainly not a fan of how they treat their employees. I think it's justified to be upset about it, but really in retrospect, again, kind of best case scenario, because again, to jump to a spoiler, things haven't changed drastically on Bandcamp, the platform itself, as far as like you and I selling our music on Bandcamp.
No, and even like people talk about the editorial like it's gone. I mean, the fact of the matter is, some people who were beloved by this music labor movement got fired or let go or whatever you would call it, and that is the big problem. It's the same thing with Pitchfork. You know what happened to it. Pitchfork is still going right now. There was this whole kerfuffle about Pitchfork being dead because the most beloved people got fired as part of a restructuring, and that's what this movement cares about. It's like their people got hit and had to hold the bag, and that's what they don't like. And that's why, I mean, you mentioned exit to community. That's a hugely important concept to Austin Roby. I know he's written about that and he's talked about that in past years and in the ampled years. So I think if you or I spoke to him, he would talk about exit to community, I'm sure. But on page 1 of the zine, I pulled something about how they phrased this. They said, Bandcamp's acquisition left musicians and music workers, there's the hook up there, with a familiar feeling of betrayal and concern. How did this happen? Wasn't Bandcamp supposed to be the good guy?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to that I'll say, like, of course, like, cynical me is like, no company is supposed to be the good guy, right? Like, that's, I think, the first mistake. And maybe artists being a bit naive or something, or overly idealistic about how these things go. And I think that's part of what's really cool about Subvert is there's this blend of the idealistic kind of futuristic models of how things could work differently, blended with some pragmatism about like, how do you really get one of these things off the ground? Before dive much more into, I would like to just hang on Bandcamp for a minute, because I think whether we actually need something like this is an important question. And one thing Subvert's manifesto zine talks about is this concept of enshittification, which we have,
which I love,
touched on briefly. Enshittification, if you're not familiar, it was coined by Cory Doctorow, or certainly popularized by the writer, hacker, author Cory Doctorow. And his explanation of the word is like, as platforms grow, he's kind of describing almost a Web 2 phenomenon. As platforms grow, their incentives shift from, early Facebook provided a good experience to a user because really their goal was to just get as many users as possible. So it was important to be like fun to use, easy to find your friends, and like see the things you care about. And so, with that incentive, it's a good user experience. It's providing value to the user. And as time goes on and these companies have to, there's problems of infinite growth, problems of getting their investors returns eventually, you have to change that from providing value to your users to extracting value from your users. So in Facebook's case, that becomes using the data, selling the users' data to advertisers and showing users lots of ads. And, over time realizing actually it's not profitable to show them really anything they want to see. It's better to just show them whatever our algorithm wants to put in front of them to keep them on the platform longer so we can show them more ads. And eventually you end up with like an unusable Facebook.com. That's maybe like the golden example of enshittification, of platform enshittification. I think he would probably extend it to other things, but when we're talking about social platforms, extend the metaphor to Spotify as well, right? Like the value of like every song you could ever think of is here in this one place. That's a good value to a user, right? They're providing value at a very low price. And the end state might be everything is AI. There's no real artists on the platform. The quality of music goes down quite a lot. And your advertising data of like what you're choosing to listen to is being sold to advertisers. It's kind of maximum extraction. And then, subscription costs go really high. Maximum extraction from your users to the company. You don't like the term enshittification, and I would like to hear why. I would like to hear why you think that's not a real or a good way of describing that phenomenon.
Okay, so I want to start by basically just straw manning the bootlicking perspective of it in a way that might be overly generous. But
sure,
if you went all the way to the other end and tried to find the most generous explanation for why this phenomenon of the last 10 years or so has become so popular, it has to do with the outrageously confident promises you could say this type of VC-backed tech or social platform business will make in the attempt at customer acquisition.
Right.
And what's going on there is they will go to market with their app, product, service, platform with the most generous terms humanly possible, and then some, because they are leveraging everything they've got, the VC's investments, the projections for how they will grow. They're burning oodles and oodles of cash to try and acquire users as quickly as possible. And what people learned, I think especially from the Facebook story, was that the best way to acquire users and customers as quickly as possible was to just make the most generous UX promise you possibly could, to make the experience as easy as possible and to spare no expense, both in terms of money and the architecture of the user experience, to try and get people to enjoy using the platform. And then it is inevitable that you cannot keep that going forever. You can't always be serving up ice cream to your kids at every meal. You are going to have to follow the natural course of a business plan to try and get a profitable business. Now, yes, that is amplified to the nth degree by the growth expectations of venture capital and such, and that can distort things. However, in this perhaps overly generous interpretation of what's going on and what Doctorow and these people call enshittification, I kind of see as the natural, inevitable course of a business model. And it is because the user's expectations have been altered so dramatically by how generous these companies are on the front end in their mad dash to acquire customers.
Okay, so it's a bit of a ZIRP, a zero interest rate phenomenon,
Yep.
where companies, when the money is free, can do that. And so the enshittification is not so much as like companies. I would still say, as my counter, I think that's true. I think that's like objectively true, right? Like why it happens is kind of natural. I would say it's a descriptive. It's still useful as a descriptor of what it's like to use one of these platforms, right? It's almost, you can think of it as like the life cycle of one of these platforms, right? It has to start at maximum user acquisition and end at maximum user exploitation. Really, unless you're careful and you kind of tune along the way. If you were to just like do your best to extract all the value and then exit somehow or end when all your users leave, like Facebook's going to be a success story. Like it's a dead internet platform at the moment. Like I think, maybe in other parts of the world it's more popular, but really in North America, it's like not a very popular social media, I think. And it's going to be a success story because everyone is going to stop using it, and it made so much money. So like it's just sort of a way of describing the life cycle and the way of describing the feeling of using a platform that you like and see it degrade and inshitify as the platform moves to extract value from its users. I would say the Subvert folks have a pretty tough case to call Bandcamp inshitified now.
I would agree.
That's a pretty tough case to make. They have not raised their takes yet, have they?
Well, the platform is not usable yet. It's not. They haven't gone to market yet. Subvert.
No, so I think we
Bandcamp
should Bandcamp hasn't inshitified because
Bandcamp hasn't started to take more money. Yeah, you're right about that. I will let us move on directly to Subvert. But I will sign off on the specific talk about enshittification with just that ultimately the reason why it bugs me as a concept is because I don't think it's a problem to be solved in and of itself. Like, sure, it's a descriptive word that people like for a certain kind of thing that you notice over the years, but like I don't think it's a thing that you can tackle. Like I don't think any platform owes you the good old days when it was making that crazy growth promise or whatever. I don't think it's our job to like work our way back to how that was, because it's unsustainable by design. That's a growth strategy. And it's not like we're going to solve that on any given platform and get it back to the good old days or anything like that. That's not the way that this works. So all that to say, yes, it's a real phenomenon that people can observe. And I understand why Subvert wants to make that case that this could happen to Bandcamp, just like we see it happening in other places.
Yes. A good button on that. So this all brings us to like, we've got Subvert. And Subvert is an alternative to Bandcamp that is still in development. So it does not exist yet. You can't go to subvert.fm and like listen to music there yet. Although if you're an artist, you can sign up for it. You can become one of the kind of original members. If you're not an artist, they are taking a kind of a donation amount to join the co-op, which we'll talk a little more about the structure. But there's kind of some ways to get involved before it's up and running. And there's a couple things that are interesting about the zine, and the zine is out there online. There's a physical zine if you sign up and you want to donate, or if you sign up as an artist, you get a physical zine. The PDF is out there, and you can find it if you're curious. And I recommend, if you're interested in any of this kind of platform stuff, checking it out. I think the most interesting thing to me about the structure of the company is that after Ampled, I think Austin realized there's some real challenges when capital-wise to getting a co-op off the ground, right? You would need this really dense set of like a base of users and a ton of activity really to make that financially viable. And so Subvert's both a cooperative, it's two entities. It's a co-op entity and a C Corp. A C Corp's public benefit corp, is that the...
Yeah. But still a corporation in that it could issue equity in the way that a co-op could. And I have to jump in here and just be cheeky and say like, well, I mean, hey, Carson, isn't that the whole point? Like, we don't want there to be a corporation. We don't want to be beholden to private equity interests, which is what it would be if you would invest in the company or VC. And yet, there are problems when you don't have that and you're trying to build something and you need the capital and you want to actually pay people instead of logging thousands of volunteer hours that everybody has a tacit understanding are never going to be paid out. You kind of want some capital. So I understand. I'm sure that's a big part of the whole thing from Austin's experience. Not that we can read his mind, but I was around Ampled and I saw it go down all of a sudden, and people kind of left wondering what happened or what if. And I think their inability to access capital as easily as so many other companies would that are just companies, like you said, I agree that would be a huge part of it.
Totally. And I think that is an interesting set of it's going to present an interesting set of challenges, like governance challenges about how they do that. So how they've got it split out is that the co-op is responsible for like the development and operations of the platform, which means that like users and members of the platform have kind of an equal cooperative say, like a democratic say in how the platform both operates and gets made and developed going forward, which is cool. I think that's like the nice thing about a co-op is like people have collective say in how things go. And then, that the users have this kind of democratic involvement in the actual platform. And then the corp is governed by a board, like a normal corporation. So they can issue, equity to investors and to members as well, right? The cooperative, you also have kind of a platform stake, which is an interesting blend. And I don't know if this has been done before. I mean, there's nonprofit and for-profit, like OpenAI is the famous example of that. But this is different than that because this is a public benefit corp.
Yeah. I think the reason we talked so much about Bandcamp before this is because it kind of makes it obvious why they would want to do this. Because I think if you isolate what people really didn't like about the Bandcamp situation, it was that the beloved editorial people and the artists, when Bandcamp changed hands for big money, didn't get any of the money and they weren't consulted.
Sure, yeah.
And if you have this structure, in theory, that will not happen. That you've safeguarded against that. Now, was it unreasonable to expect either of those groups to be consulted? Yes, because Bandcamp was just a VC-backed San Francisco company, or like a privately funded company that did not make that particular promise. But because of the vibes of Bandcamp, people perhaps came to feel entitled to it is too strong a term, but the energy around Bandcamp grew in such a way, or they were perceived in that way. So when they didn't actually do that, either when Epic came in or when Epic let go of it, and when the union thing went down around the time Epic let go of it, when they felt like they didn't have a seat at the table, and when they felt like they weren't getting any of the proceeds, I think that's the reason we've isolated about why the vibes at Bandcamp deteriorated. Now, I want to just quickly throw in that, unfortunately, and this is why I'm still skeptical of Subvert, probably more than yourself. I'm finding myself more on the other side right now. Unfortunately, this founder, this is what happened to his previous co-op venture as well. This is what happened at Ampled. There were hundreds of artists who, when it went down, they didn't feel like they had a seat at the table and they didn't get cash. Ampled wasn't sold. There was no proceeds, but I think if you look at how the platform wound up all of a sudden, I think most of the artists on the platform probably felt like they didn't have a seat at the table. So I think there's some weird history there. But that's a bigger thing than what we can solve today. But I think if you look at this structure, there's a clear reason behind it. And it's what they write about in the zine, and it's why they don't like the vibes at Bandcamp. It's because when that was happening there, they didn't feel like they had a seat at the table. They didn't feel like they have ownership. They want to try and do that, regardless of whether or not there's much precedent of if these people have the ability to actually lock in and do it.
Yes, that's a really good thing to keep in mind. And I mean, they still have a lot of proving to do. I think co-ops present a challenge. What you're making here is a tech company, and tech companies, many of the most successful ones, are run basically by an autocrat, right? Like
Yep.
there's this top down founder mode. I don't agree with it. I don't think it makes it a nice place to work, but they make good products and fast. And I think that's like a lesson, or at least will mean that the co-op has to operate differently or change its expectations of development, growth, what this is going to really be like, and then manage its investors' expectations. Because again, if you're beholden to a whole cooperative of people who all have a stake in this and have to listen to those folks, then it cannot work like a company where a CEO is going to say like, no, this is what we're doing, and my chief product officer is going to make all the product decisions, and everyone just go do what he says.
Now, that said, they do have a roadmap. I glanced around it. According to the roadmap right now, we're in a phase 4 platform launch where, we said it's not out there yet, but it could be out there pretty soon around the time this airs and, in the months to come. And in that part of the roadmap, that what they say is they're going to begin a phased onboarding for version 1 of the platform. And then they also say they're going to host a town hall this fall. So it's interesting timing for us to talk about this, because there could be something where we could hear from them, or you could hear from them too, maybe, depending on your involvement with the platform, our involvement with the platform too, in the near future. And there are also apparently over 40 members in Vancouver.
Yeah. Where did you get that number? Is that, you're able to just look that up? I didn't see that anywhere.
There was somewhere where they broke down, they hit 5,000, I believe. And they shouted out some cities.
That's awesome. Let's maybe talk a little bit about their kind of prospective exits, which again, I think is interesting for a platform that's in its infancy to be transparent about how they're thinking about potential exits. Because I think usually when you talk to a platform, a company at this stage of their growth, they just say like infinite growth. We're just like, we're going to the moon, and like, we'll know it when we get there. And
Ample was like that a little bit. Everything, that's not to blame them. Everything that people started in 2021 was like that.
Totally. Because like, we don't know what the future looks like. We think this is good. Very funny. Was Ample a crypto thing? This is not a crypto thing.
No, they weren't at all. There was already this is another episode we could do, but there was another platform, and it technically kind of still exists maybe, called Resonate. And they had this whole journey where in an earlier phase of it, they kind of affiliated with a token launch, and like it in the crypto bust of 2018, like they got wiped out. And then it took them like several years just to get back on their feet and try and do anything at all. And like this platform is not really a going concern right now, and they've had a lot of issues. But we could tell the Resonate story some other time. But I bet you that's like a direct reference to Resonate, if not to other similar things or rug pulls or whatever people associate. So fair that they don't want to be associated with that. I agree.
Totally. So yeah, they kind of discuss some options for exits, one of which is exit to community, which is, you probably have a better understanding of how these actually work, where you basically just become fully collectively owned, right? Like by the participants in the co-op.
Yeah, I mean, they also talk about ESOPs. ESOPs, the acronym for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, I think.
Yep.
And it's where you can sell the company to a consortium of labor and their representatives. And, that's a thing that's widely done in the traditional business world. So, like, there's precedent there. I think exit to community is kind of like a tech guy version of an ESOP, but I mean, I don't really know too much about what it is. I just remember that phrase being around Ample and in the Ample Discord. I doubt that there is actually a specific charted course that you could call exit to community. I bet it's more like a philosophy that you could describe different directions that you go down as being part of like an ethos. Right. I bet you it's like an ethos more than a specific plan.
Trying to get, because then there's usually liquidity in an exit of some sort. So like some people get some actual equity or some money that becomes worth something, or some shares that become worth something. And so making sure that the participants and the members of the co-op get some of that liquidity, I think is admirable. Again, it sounds like you've witnessed some examples that I'm sure that Ample would have loved to do that one day and didn't, and like there wasn't a stake. This is I know we are like running low on time. It's a very, I think it's a cool idea. I think I always like to see hopeful alternatives. These are not people who are just saying like, let's move to the woods and we have to only sing songs at each other over a campfire. Like we can have a music tech platform that is not actively going to be harming the lives of the artists that use it. I think an argument is that like Bandcamp still kind of is that. And again, people feel complicated feelings about Bandcamp, but as far as like the artists who are just trying to make a living, I don't know if there's like strong reasons to completely stop or like move all your stuff over. I think if Subvert launches and it's a success, then absolutely people should sign up and upload to it. But what do you think about it? I mean, you talked about some of your reservations.
So I'm still too skeptical to join as an artist. I'm not going to join as an artist. I'm going to be curious about their go-to-market. I might join as a user. I want to learn more. I want to hear from them. I think I'm a little scarred by my participation in some of these things in that, living off vibes and NFTs era that I referenced earlier. I was in there. I remember what that felt like. And it's very clear that we are not in that era any longer. And it doesn't look like it's coming back anytime soon. And so I feel scarred in the sense that like, I want to see what you have to say about the user, about the customer, about the consumer, whatever dirty words you aren't using when you're talking, like you said, high-mindedly about the principles of the platform and how it will be run internally and how we're going to do it. And to be fair, they're not launched yet, but there's not much talk about what the promise is to the user, to the customer. Sure. Why are they going to use it instead of another platform? That's something that they're going to have to reckon with as they go to market. It's not really a primary concern of any of their manifesto writing so far. And it wasn't either at some of these other projects that I was involved in 2021, 2022. And I think that was their curse because they don't hold up in the marketplace because they don't have a unique promise to the user. And if this platform is going to stand out above others that I've seen come and go, they're going to have to figure out something there. They're going to have to figure out a way to bring in users that one works, but also two, let's say it works. What doesn't open them up to people feeling like they've been in-shitified 5 years later when they have to figure out a way to keep the lights on? Are they going to make an outrageous promise like I was talking about earlier to their users? That's a hard thing to do. Not everybody can just do that. So what are they going to do? What is their answer to why the users should use it? And that's why, in my skepticism, I'm probably going to eschew joining as an artist for the time being, and I'm going to approach it from the user side. And I'm going to see, are they better than other platforms that I looked at in that sense? Do I enjoy using it? What's my experience like using it? What's their trajectory? They have revenue promises in that zine. I think they're pretty crazy. I feel like I'm on Dragon's Den when I say that because they're always like, "Oh, the valuation's insane. I'm out." The numbers aren't lined up for me. But you gotta be ambitious. This is why I will spend over an hour talking about such a thing on a podcast. Is because you have to dream big. You have to be ambitious. You have to go for it. I want more of that. I don't want less of that. So I don't want to tear them down. But I am coming at this because I and the other people involved in this, we've seen what usually happens when people start things like this. So how is this one going to be different once it hits the marketplace and once it gets to users?
Yeah, I think those are all really good things to keep in mind. I think that focus on the user is interesting and good. And it's funny to think about because obviously when you start from the cooperative members and the artists as your starting point, I think that's a good thing in principle, right? That's kind of what the artists are asking for, right? If there's music streaming platforms, we're this labor force that the platforms depend on, so let's make an artist-centric one, right? Something that focuses on compensating the artist, making it good, making sure we have a stake in its success. But you're right, like in a competitive marketplace, like how you need users. I suspect, or I'll be interested to see, because I think you're right. We want people to try weird things, and I want to see some weird things succeed. What I would like as much, if not more, than Subvert doing super well is Subvert to launch imitators, more imitators. Because, if Bandcamp, say, is not long for this world, and again, debatable, I don't know what I think about that, that if there's a marketplace of competitors, then surely one that's artist focused and has a good user experience and maybe an interesting business model will succeed down the road. And so like having this kind of healthy marketplace of competitors and people with weird ideas and alternative setups is a good thing. So yeah, I say I wish them the best, and I hope it goes well for them.
I wish them the best, and I hope it goes well for them too. Yeah, I'm very curious to see what the launch will be like, and it's cool that it seems like it's coming down the pipe very soon. So we'll have something to react to more than everything we've just read so far, I think, real soon, and we'll get a chance to hear from them real soon. So yeah, this is going to be interesting, and we like to see people trying things like this. Of course we do.
Absolutely. So yeah, we keep your ear to the ground for more news about Subvert. I'm sure if when they launch, we'll mention it on here with more thoughts. Do you will have a recommendation for the folks out there this week?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to recommend an episode of a podcast. The podcast is called All One Song, a Neil Young podcast. It is by the blog Aquarium Drunkard. It's like a podcast series off of their main podcasting outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mini podcast series where people are talking about Neil Young songs. And there is an episode where the guest is Jeff Parker, and they're talking about the song The Needle and the Damage Done. So if that already sounds like it interests you, then go listen to that podcast episode.
Heavy. That's very cool. I have a bit of a sideways recommendation. It's an album, and it's a new album, and it's by Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber released an album called Swag this last Friday. It might have been, might surprise you to know I'm not following him on social platforms. It was a surprise to me. I think it might have been like a shadow launch kind of situation. This album surprised me. I will not say I love it. There's a couple bangers, but this album is largely produced by two kind of my favorite in the indie kind of alternative pop and R&B space, Miggy and Dijon. McGee's playing guitar all over this thing. His production style is all over it. Dijon has a feature, and I think production credits on several of the songs. The album is called Swag. It's Justin Bieber doing something quite different and weird. And I think what maybe thrilled me when I initially listened to it was like, it's very neat to hear some of these sounds in like the uber mainstream. Like McGee, was a very famous producer, had a New York Times profile last year, but like to see Justin Bieber, using some of these same sounds and kind of very kind of alternative production styles and choices, was a cool step.
Can I tell you how I learned about this album's drop?
How did you learn?
So on release day, which was, I believe it was Friday, July 11th, I think was the release day. I was in the car with Vez and our friends Madeline and Chad, and we were driving to Tawasin to catch a ferry to ultimately go to a wedding. Okay. And we were listening to the radio in the car, and the radio person was like, Justin Bieber has wowed his fans with a surprise album drop, and what does it mean about his relationship with Hailey Bieber? That's up next, and then
wow.
That came out, and they played a track from it or something. So I don't really remember what it sounded like, though, so I'll have to go back and actually revisit the music now. But I heard about it on release day thanks to the radio. That's
very funny. Yeah, it's a I don't know, it's not a full-throated recommendation. I just think if you are even a little bit interested, it's interesting. It's
no, surprising. Don't hedge, man. Don't hedge. Lean into the Bieber fever. Come on here.
Yeah, we got to support our own here in Canada.
Yeah, elbows up.
Yeah.
Man, that was a good one.
That was great. Thank you for chatting with me about about Subvert. I'm curious to see how this all goes, and we will be back at it in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and we will see you in August already. So hope you're having a great summer.